Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Constructionline Talks, where myself, Mike Wood, and Martin Rogers are going to take you through buyer connections, which is, I hope you'll agree, when we've been through the presentation, an important addition to the Constructionline portfolio and functionality. As we go through, this webinar will be recorded, so obviously you'll be receiving a link to the recording at the end of the webinar, so you'll be able to go back and familiarize yourself or refresh yourself on any of the points that were discussed. If you do have any questions, then please do enter them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll attempt, whoever's not presenting at the time, to actually respond to those live, but we will also look to do a quick summary of them at the end of the presentation, so that any questions that do get asked, then we'll cover those off at the end. And right, let's get started. So what we're going to do this morning is give you a very brief overview, then walk you through buyer connections and the risk policy manager notification engine. Do a quick demo, because it's always great to see things live. And then, as I said, we'll do a quick summary of Q&A. Also gives you a bit of an opportunity, if there are any questions that occurred to you as we were going through that you didn't get time to post, then there's a good sort of 5 minutes or more that we can cover those at the end. And then really just a quick future topic. So what's coming next in Constructionline Talks? Okay, so buyer connections. So buyer connections is really important, both from a contractor and a supply chain point of view. And the reason for that is it demonstrates to the supply chain the tangible benefit of Constructionline membership and promotes compliance. And the reason this is so important and is such a big change in the way that Constructionline is now set up is it's really gives your supply chain the opportunity to see the different projects that they're engaged with you on. If you do happen to have different compliance requirements, perhaps one project requires somebody to be at the silver level and another at gold, they can actually see those different compliance requirements against the different projects that they're working for you on. So from a contractor perspective, a connection to somebody within your supply chain is made whenever that supplier is added to a supply chain segment. And if you choose to make that segment visible, obviously you've still got control. You can put suppliers within segments and choose not to make it visible. Maybe that you're still not quite ready or you're going through a particular shortlisting process. Suppliers then will have their status not only measured against the Constructionline levels, bronze, silver, gold, or platinum, but actually the compliance policy that you have chosen for that particular segment. And as I mentioned before, you may actually have different requirements depending upon the risk of a project or the value of a project that suppliers are actually working on. And you can actually see all of the connections that a given supplier has with your business. So, you know, one glance, you'll be able to see that a particular supplier is working on 3, 4, or 5 different projects for you, all through the buyer connections panel that Martin will take you through in a moment. And then from the supply chain point of view, well, they see that buyer connection, as I mentioned, if you have checked that visible to supplier segment and enabled it. But they can then obviously view, edit, and submit requirements that belong to the compliance policy, as long as they've got the right level of subscription. And this is also an important aspect for them, that they'll also get an upgrade prompt. For example, if they're working on a project that does require gold, but previously they've always been on the Constructionline as silver, they'll be prompted that they do need to upgrade in order to be compliant with that policy for that project you're working on. So I think it gives another dimension to the way that contractors can actually interact through the Constructionline platform with their supply chain. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Mike, for that introduction. So as we said, we're talking about the buyer connections, and there's several topics within buyer connections that I'm going to talk to you through and then demonstrate to you. So we're talking about setting up the segments and adding to the supply chain. So this is a way around just creating those segments, whether they be projects or segments or buildings, and then being able to set the compliance status, so the gold and the silver, as Mike indicated, as well as visibility. So again, visibility to the suppliers. Can your suppliers actually see that connection? As well as being able to add suppliers to them. I'll then take you through how buyer connections are viewed from both yourselves as buyers, as being contractors, and then from the supplier's view as well. And then I'll give you a brief introduction to the risk policy manager at the segment level, which is all around setting up email alerts and notifications such that if there are any changes to that segment, you can be automatically alerted to the changes. So if we come on to create or edit segment and the compliance policy. So every supply chain segment needs a compliancy. So the system won't allow you to create a new segment without you specifying a compliance policy. And the policy is used to set the level of risk that you're prepared to accept and wish to measure suppliers on in that segment. So again, as Mike was saying, for any given project, or any type of segment, really, it could be a building, it could be a framework. What is the level of risk that you're wanting to set and monitor and actively monitor your supply chain within that segment? The compliance policies, as we've indicated, are actually the Constructionline levels that suppliers sign up to. So they should be both familiar to yourselves and to your supply chain. So the platinum, the gold, the silver, the bronze, and then new subscription packages are along the way around materials, which are coming soon, if not already available for contractors now. As we said, different segments can have different compliance statuses. So what that means now is that a single supplier can have multiple compliance statuses at the same time, one for each compliance policy again. So this is a slightly different change to historically where the platform has been, or the legacy platform has been. Now we can actually monitor suppliers at different levels because those levels are set within different segments. And you can see, and you'll be able to see, through the front end when viewing a segment, whether the supplier is verified or not verified, and if they're not verified as well, whether they actually need to upgrade. So as Mike suggested and pointed out, maybe you've set the compliance policy to gold and you've added some subcontractors who are silver. Obviously they're not verified because they haven't got the gold status, but you'll also be able to see that actually they actually require an upgrade as well. When you're also creating and editing the segment, you can also set and unset the visible to suppliers flag. So the visible to suppliers flag is used to allow suppliers to actually see the high level segment information that you've created. So the buyer name, who you are, which supply chain it's within, the segment type. So we've talked about segments and projects and buildings. So there's assets, there's frameworks as well. The name of the segment, as well as the compliance policy. So they get a high level information of what that segment is. They don't get to see which other suppliers are in that segment. That's not available to them, but they get to see the high level information about which segment they're in and the risk level that you've set on which you are monitoring them against. When you're creating a new segment, the is visible or manage segment visible to suppliers flag is enabled, which basically means it's ticked. However, if you don't want to share this segment, if you have a specific reason that you don't want to share this segment to suppliers, as Mike said, maybe you're just in the infancy of that project, so you're just getting together some lists before you want to share it, then again, you can uncheck that box, and therefore it will not be visible to the suppliers. Once the segment has been set up and you're using the segment, you can go in and edit the segment at any stage, and at that point you can either check or uncheck that make visible to suppliers. So it's not a decision you make once. You can change that visibility across the duration and lifetime of that segment. Now, when you come to create the segment, and therefore you go to save and create it, or when you're editing and updating that segment and you want to save those changes, the system will actually flag you to actually reconfirm your settings. And that's because the compliance policy and the segment visibility status now can potentially have a big impact on your supply chain. And again, it's all about making that visible to suppliers, as well as monitoring them. So, as an example, if the segment was visible to them and you decide to edit the segment and make it invisible to them, that connection will be lost on the supplier side, so they will no longer be able to see that segment. Similarly, if you decide to change the compliancy, whether you move it up or down, so if you go from silver to gold, or perhaps from gold to silver, when you confirm those changes, the system will automatically recalculate the segment compliance status for every single supplier or contractor in that segment. And potentially, if it's an upgrade, so if you've gone from silver to gold, any supplier or contractor who was only on the silver level will then be notified they actually need to upgrade, and they'll be presented with that upgrade option in the platform for themselves to see the next time they log in, because you've changed the compliance policy from silver to gold. So as I say, when creating or editing the segments now, you will get a reconfirm message dialog coming up, just so that you can make sure that the settings that you have selected are the correct settings that you want to apply to that segment. So how do you get to see those buyer connections? We predominantly get to see those buyer connections through the supplier's profile in the Find Suppliers app. So what you'll be able to see is on the Compliance tab, where you're used to seeing the levels and the work categories, widgets and segments panels at the top of the page. On the right hand side, you'll now see a Buyer Connections panel, and that will list the connection types that you have with the supplier that you're viewing. And in this instance here that we can see with Castech Group, we've got connections for the DPS, for projects, and for segments. And then clicking on that panel will actually display the table beneath that, where you can actually see the individual segments by name and by organization unit, to actually then see their compliance status at each of the segment levels. So again, you can start to see the breakdown of that information. Upon expanding one of those connections, you'll then actually get to see the requirements that are making up the compliance policy. And then again, you get the compliance status for each of the requirements at the individual level. And obviously, you can then see on the right-hand side there's the See responses. So you can click on that button to actually go through and see the underlying questions and the underlying answers that the supplier in question has given. And as I say, you can do that for any one of the suppliers within any of the segments. So again, even when using the Find Suppliers app without the supply chain, or not in conjunction with the supply chain app itself, you'll be able to see these buyer connections, to see the relationship that you have with those with those suppliers. Now, on the supplier side, what do they get to see? Well, they have a status tab similar to yourselves. And when you make a segment visible to suppliers, then they will get to see the corresponding buyer connection. So as I say, they have a status tab, and on the right-hand side there, they have the buyer connections. Now that lists the buyer connections that have been made visible to them. So it is possible that this supplier, Castech Group Limited, could be on many other segments, but they're not visible to them because they haven't been made visible to them. So they'll only get to see, Castech Group will only get to see buyer connections where the segment has the visible to suppliers flag as ticked or checked. In that summary panel, they can see how many connections they've got with different buyers, and they can also see at that high level the status of that connection to that buyer, so whether it's met or not met. And again, clicking on that panel displays the lower table, and for them, they can then start to see the additional information on a segment by segment basis, including the segment name, the organization unit, segment stage, and compliance status. When they expand one of those connections within the table, they will then see the requirements that belong to that compliance policy. And again, it's the compliance policy of the segment that was formed by the buyer connection. And again, they'll see the requirements and also the status information. And from there, they'll then, as they can normally do at the moment, they'll be able to view and edit and submit the requirements from within that table. So again, being able to quickly and easily see what requirements need their attention for them to update answers and get them submitted in order to get verified. If the compliance policy of the buyer connection is not within the current Constructionline membership, then as Mike indicated, they will be presented with an upgrade button. So again, this supplier may have purchased silver, and in fact, I think this supplier has actually purchased gold, but they happen to be placed in a segment that's been made visible to them, which has a compliance policy of platinum. In which case, they will be presented with the upgrade button option within that segment when they're viewing the segments. If they expand that panel, so they can see on the right hand side, again, we can expand the panel, we can see the requirements that make up the compliance policy for that segment, and they'll be able to see which requirements are already included in their membership and actually which requirements are not included, and therefore that's what they need to upgrade for. So again, we're giving them the ability to see the additional information that they'll need to provide for that membership that they're being asked to upgrade to. In addition to the upgrade link within the segment itself, at the top of the banner, so at the top of the page, whichever tab they're on, so whether they're on the Issues tab or the company profile or the work categories, an orange banner will be presented to the users to make it clear that they have at least one connection which requires an upgrade, a membership upgrade, and whether they click in the banner, from the banner at the top level, or whether they click from within the segment on the upgrade button, either button will actually take them through to the area where they can manage their membership, and they can review the membership information and begin the upgrade process if they so choose. What Buyer Connections also does, it also provides information and can help the suppliers understand or get a better understanding where requirements are either due to expire or have expired, the impact that those requirements are having, because the impact doesn't just have an impact on their membership or a specific Constructionline level, but they'll be able, it also has an impact on the buyer connections that they're working on with you. So on the Supplier Issues tab, the Issues tab itself enables the supplier to quickly and easily see which requirements are actually needed of their attention. And it's the equivalent to the Issues tab that you see as a buyer within the Find Supplier app when viewing a supplier's profile. Now, when they click on the impact or the affecting column against any requirement within that list, that expands a panel. And as you can see here, it will tell them what levels, what Constructionline levels that requirement is impacting on, as well as actually the buyer connections. So they can actually see which projects or which segments that requirement is impacting on. Again, giving them a better way to actually manage their compliance and see the impact that their non-compliance will have on the connections and how they're working with yourselves. The final section here is just to introduce risk policy manager to you, and in this instance, segment notifications. So this is all back in on the buyer side and within the supply chain app. So as a supply chain user, you can now subscribe to email notifications on a segment by segment basis. And there are two types of alerts. There's an instant alert where you'll immediately be sent an email when that event occurs. And within that email, you'll have a link to the supplier profile. So the supplier in question who's had a change, you'll be able to, from within that email, click on the link, and that will take you back into the platform to see related information. Excuse me. There's also a daily summary. So once a day, a summary email will be sent, which contains a list of the events that you've subscribed to which have occurred that day and a count. And again, within that email, there are links to then reports within the platform in which will actually then provide you with the information of the suppliers that have been included and have been triggered by that alert. It's important to note that you'll only receive notifications for the segments that you have set subscribed events for, and where an actual event occurs on any given day for these segments. So as you can see here, at the moment, there are four types of alerts that are available to you. So that's suppliers being added to segments, suppliers being deleted or removed from segments, suppliers if they have changed or moved stage. So maybe they've moved from the not approved to approved, or from approved to not approved. And there's also the suppliers who have had a change of segment status. So again, coming back through to the buyer connections, where you're setting that policy of maybe silver or gold. If you then subscribe to the emails notifications, if a supplier has a status change, let's just say if we're monitoring at gold and they go from gold verified to gold not verified, you can be alerted if you've signed up for the notifications. You can be alerted then either instantly through the instant alert or on the daily summary that suppliers have changed status against the policy that you're monitoring them against within the given segments. Okay, so I've taken you through an overview of that. Let's actually go into the platform now and show you that. Okay, so hopefully you can all still see my screen. And what I've got here is the supply chain app, and I'm in a specific division here, my FM Southwest division. And here I've got my list of segments within this specific division. And what I'm going to do is I'll just click into Avonmouth Docs, which gives me my list of suppliers who are already in in the segment. I can quickly just click on the overview tab, which gives me some of the information, and I can see that this segment has been set to a compliance policy level of silver. So we're monitoring everyone against silver. So if I come back in to the suppliers list, I can see the status of each of the suppliers and where it's not verified, whether they actually need an upgrade or whether, in which case they need to upgrade their subscription, or whether actually they have got the right subscription level, they're just not verified for it at the moment. So again, I can click through and view any one of these suppliers. If I click on through, it lands me on the summary tab to give me information, general information about them, and I can come down through and see the contact information. But otherwise, if I click through to the compliance tab, you can now see the buyer connections panel or widget on the right hand side. And I can see that I've got three connections here, 2 for project and 1 for segment. And I can see that I'm okay for the segments, but I'm not okay for the project. So if I click into show details, you can then start to see the information or the segments below that. And again, I'm seeing which division they're in, or supply chain they're in, the type of connection that it is, and also what stage within the segment that they are in. And I can see here that they're not verified. And if I expand the segment, I can come through and see the information here. So I can see that the BIM is not verified. And as you can normally do, you can click through and see responses. So again, you can see it's not verified and has expired. Okay, so if I then go back into the segment, what I'll now do is I'll actually edit and update the segment, and I'll change the compliance policy. So if I click on the edit, I can come through. As I said, compliance policy here is silver. I'll actually take it through and change it to gold. And I'll click on the save. And here is the confirm your settings. So it's just telling me that the compliance status is gold. So each supplier segment status is going to be recalculated against gold, and the fact that this segment is visible to the suppliers, and therefore they're going to see those changes come through. And do I agree to these changes? Yes, I do. So that's all been confirmed and saved. And now when I go through to my suppliers, you can now see that statuses have been recalculated. There are more people who need to upgrade, and HV Cook and Son have now lost their status. So if I go through, come to the compliance, I can now see that projects 0 from 2 are okay. And if I go through to Avonmouth Docks, you can see here, because that's now gold and their BIM is not verified, and BIM being their building information modeling requirement is part of the gold package, or the gold membership package, you can then see that the segment is not their status against that particular segment has now gone from verified to not verified. Okay. Whilst I'm so that's seeing the buyer connections from the buyer side. What I'll now do is I'll go through and view them from the supplier side. So I just need to impersonate one of those suppliers in order to see what they get to see. So if you just bear with me. So this is me now logging in as Gary Bond from HV Cook and Son Limited. So if I click on the Manage Compliance app, this is their status tab, so similar to your status tab. And what you can see here or on the left-hand side, first of all, on the status tab is their membership and the levels they've purchased and their current status against that. We have their work category information. And then on the right-hand side here, we have the buyer connections panel. So we can see at the moment they've got one relationship with the buyer of Constructionline. And I can go through and view the details. And then I can see I'm not verified. And it will be for the building information modeling requirements. So again, I can see that I'm not verified. This is the reason why I'm not verified. And therefore I could go through and I can actually see that it's currently in for assessment at the moment. So actually I'm trying to get myself verified as HV Cook & Son in order to get that through such that my verification status will change on that. Now, as I said, at the moment, when I've logged in as Gary here at HV, I've only got one relationship with Constructionline, and that's because there's only been one segment which has been shared, or I'm only in one segment that has been shared with Gary. So if I just come back out and go back into the supply chain and then go into my Southwestern division, what I'll do here is actually go into a separate project. So I'll go into the Bath University. And I can see here that this is currently set at gold, so that's fine. And I will add HV Cook into this segment now. And we can see that it is visible to suppliers. So if I go back in now and impersonate Gary again. Now, when I go through to the status, you can see that I have two connections. And when I click through, I'm getting to see both the Avonmouth Docks project and I can see the Bath University campus regeneration building. Now, again, because the segments are at gold, the verification here is just not verified. There is no upgrade required. What I'll now do for the final time with this segment is actually change the compliance policy such that it will force or notify, rather, all suppliers in here that need an upgrade. So if I go and edit the segment, change the segment policy to platinum, click on save again, asking to confirm the details. The compliance policy is platinum. The segment is visible. I'll confirm those changes. Again, from the buyer side, from our side, we can see that actually both suppliers in this segment now are not verified and they need to upgrade. And if I now go and impersonate HV Cook again, what you can now see is the orange banner that I previously showed you through the slide deck, informing Gary that he actually needs a buyer connection is requiring an upgrade to membership. And if they click through, they'll now be able to see that there is an upgrade button against that connection. And again, we can click through here and see that I can no longer edit the requirements or edit the questions for that segment. And then again, I'm getting information about which requirements are within my current membership, and then which ones are actually included with the upgrade, so the on-site audit report here. Now, this doesn't necessarily force suppliers to upgrade, so they're under no obligation to upgrade, but it shows how they have a relationship to yourselves as buyers and how they're being monitored or measured against, and they have the option to upgrade if they so choose. And clicking the upgrade button would start allow them to review the benefits of the platinum membership so that they can start the upgrade process if they so choose. Finally, I'll touch on the risk policy manager and notifications. So again, in my Southwest division, if I come through, makes no difference, I'll choose Avonmouth Docks. You'll see in the top right hand corner now you have the notifications button or option at the top here. And when I click on that, you'll then be given a panel, and then you can see which notifications you wish to sign up for. And it's simply just clicking and unclicking and then cancelling or confirming those changes. So as I say, you have a series of instant alerts. So if as soon as a supplier is deleted from the segment, then an instant alert will be triggered if you've enabled it. The summary is a once a day notification that will come out, and it will include a count against the number of suppliers who have been triggered by that type of activity. So in this instance, how many suppliers have been added to the segment? If I was to do this, how many suppliers would have a change status? And as I say, I can do that on a segment by segment basis, so that different segments can have different notification settings. So I could actually just say, take all of those off and have a daily summary there. Now, what I've got here is an email that's occurred. So you can see here, this has actually occurred whilst doing the demonstration, and you can see that this is the added to. So this is where a contractor has been added to a segment. I can see which segment it is, and I can click on the link. And if you're logged into the platform, it will automatically take you to the compliance tab. If not, you will be asked to log into the platform, but I can then quickly go in here and then see the information about HV Cook & Son. Just one final thing, which is the actual notifications, the summary report. I can't actually show you the report itself, but what I can show you is that from the link that would be sent. So here's an old one that you'll see. So you'll get your summary email coming through, and it will tell you that 6 suppliers have been added. As I said, it's an old one, so it won't tally up. But clicking on that link will actually take you through into the notifications reporting area, and then you can see. So this is goal status change. You can see what's happened on which projects, and then you're able to click through from that report and see, go through and see that supplier in detail, see their compliance, etc. Okay, so that concludes the demonstration. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Martin. So there were a few questions that came through whilst you were doing or running through the presentation and the demo. For the benefit of those on the call, I'll just recap a couple of those. So there was a question around the visible to suppliers. I think it's worth noting for everybody's information that the current list that you have already created will be defaulted to not visible. So if you do want to go in and make them visible, then as Martin was showing, it's simply a case of going to each segment, clicking on edit, and then clicking on the make visible to suppliers button. It is also worth pointing out, because somebody obviously was very keen during the demonstration and went in and had a look, that the make visible to supply chain option isn't currently enabled. We're giving you a kind of probably a bit of a preview of something that will be in I guess the next few days. So probably by the end of the week, that capability will be in there, but we wanted to give you that option and take you through this before time. Somebody was asking about making an informed choice about the policy levels or the compliance levels and what impact that may have on the supply chain. And yeah, more than happy to do that. And I think the sales team or your account manager would be very happy to support with any analysis of what it might mean to the supply chain if you were to change your compliance policy from silver to gold. It is worth mentioning that actually I think currently more than a third of all members of Constructionline are now currently at gold, so running close to 15,000. There is a good chance that a large proportion of anybody's supply chain is already at gold, potentially through other connections that they may have with other contractors through the supply chain, which is all good because that helps to obviously defray that cost a little bit. Question on what is a project versus a segment? A segment is really the generic name for every list or bucket that gets created. And what the team have done is allow different names to be attributed to those. I think projects gives a slightly different capability with regards to analytics and reporting. So it's possible to pick those up separately, but otherwise they behave the same. Attaching a compliance policy is the same, and making visible to the supply chain all work exactly the same. There's a couple of other questions that have just come in. Is this currently live within the platform? So no, it's not. It will be within the next few days. And it says, another question was around viewing all documentation held by a particular company, but it's not possible. You have to go into the compliance hub. Yes, that's absolutely the case. And we are looking at introducing what we're calling a document library, which would pull all the documentation relating to an individual business into one place to allow you to view that rather than actually having to go into the individual requirements, be they environmental, to have a look at policies, etc. So that is something that we'll be picking up on one of these talks over the next couple of months. But great to have that feedback. Thank you. Okay, so that nearly wraps it up for this morning. Just in terms of what's coming up next on Constructionline Talks, Risk Radar. So Risk Radar is some very detailed analytical information and analysis that has been designed really to help protect your businesses against supply chain compliance and insolvency risk. So the Risk Radar module is something that you can actually add as a bolt-on. It's been created to provide people like yourselves with some real in-depth insight to the risk profile of suppliers and subcontractors that make up the supply chain. It is very flexible and delivers really the kind of insight that you might be looking for, and allows you to really start to manage things at much more of an exception level. So, 99% of the time, the vast majority of businesses within your supply chain are going to be fine, but it's the one or two that you want to be alerted to that perhaps are looking like they might be at risk of insolvency, and what's the impact that's going to have on any of the particular projects that you might be having. So as you can see here, a small screenshot of one of the views. There are some really good embedded visualization tools that will allow you to really pull out some very useful insights from that. So over the next couple of weeks, look out for the invitations. We'll be putting together another one of these talks to take you through Risk Radar. Okay, thank you very much for taking the time to join this morning. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will send you a copy of this webinar so that you can go back over it yourself and refresh any points, and look out for the introduction of the buyer connections visible to segment functionality over the next week. Thank you very much.